Coming up on a Thursday night, let's take a look inside that NFL Combine. Defensive linemen and defensive edge rushers on full display here. Linebackers still to come, but a number of talented, athletic prospects give me hope that Joe Schoen can find some middle round success for Big Blue in the 2023 draft. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant podcast, just a handful of hours after you previously saw us here on YouTube, where I mentioned trying to get back in for some of the combine conversation. Obviously, kicked off around 3:30. I'm absorbing all of it over on NFL Plus. So there's these little gaps in between positional groups. We've seen defensive linemen, we've seen defensive end edge players now go through here in a couple of groups. And then we're also going to get some linebackers, which I'm excited for. And you'll note that I will be monitoring the feed over in the background here. And when that comes back up, you will see me conclude this lovely broadcast and then dive back into it. So early tomorrow morning, I think, or at least some point over the next 12 to 15 hours, I'll tap back into this and dive in on some of those prospects, because there's really been a lot of nice players to come out here. Now, I want to try to be concise about this. Essentially, we'll run through a couple of the criteria around this, right? So you have, for defensive linemen, all these players, opportunity to run the 40. But then we also get our attention in on that you're going to be able to run the wave, the four bag, the pass rush, the run and club. We're also going to get the hoops. We're going to get the body control. And then when it comes to the second group, we're going to get three instances of being able to get a look at some of these players when it comes to being able to do three iterations of working into zone coverage, including zone and breaks there in the third one, which is ranging really 10, 15 to 20 yards down the field, and then breaking on the ball. And what's important to remember about these drills when we're looking at these players is some of them are going to be guys that are primarily going to be getting after ball carriers. They're going to be down near the line of scrimmage, on the line of scrimmage. So on the back end of this, it's funny because some of the guys that get plus rated, when you go back and look at their early grades or how we're looking at some of these drills, you start to realize, well, where they're not successful, which could be more primarily in a capacity of playing at the defensive end, playing off the edge in 3-4-4-3, and getting after the quarterback because they have athleticism, they have speed. The interior guys, nose tackles, big boys, you want those guys obviously to be bulldozing. And that's the difference between some of these drills. We don't get that zone coverage getting back into space in three iterations with the defensive line in group number one, but we do see it in the second group. So inside of this group, there's some guys that are just going to be obvious ones here. I have Draft Buzz pulled up over here. I didn't get a chance to do it with group number two yet, but I will, and we'll come back into this between now and the draft, just over and over again. As we work out of this combine, it'll start to inform the way I'm looking at some of these players. But if we go in and think about where some of these players stand right now, specifically inside of that defensive line, and it will be defensive line, tackle, edge, inside of that group, there are a number of players that I find really interesting that played in this. And then you start to look at and say, as I pulled up an offensive lineman here instead of defensive line, you start to get a sense of what's going to be possible for the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen, because we know that we need help around the line, even depth-wise on the edge, interior, nose tackle. Then we get to these linebackers. We want to have both run support, but also coverage. And, Andy and I talked about it this morning about trying to find guys that, in theory, can be a little bit of both, can have some versatility. We were mentioning Overshown in the linebacker spot, which you can go check out the write-up on him on Substack, adamarmbrecht.substack. Because I like his athleticism, I like his range, I like what you can do with him. But there's some limitations to his game because he's 220 pounds playing at the linebacker spot. So he's going to have a harder time unless there's clear lanes to get to the quarterback and to get to the running back for that matter as well. So let's just, though, at the top here, Brian Breesy, who came out and looked absolutely phenomenal here, but he has an average ADP of 19.4. This is a guy that I don't anticipate being around for the Giants. And on top of which, it's not a guy that I anticipate the Giants going after given their hierarchy of needs, right? But there were several guys. So when I walked through this, and actually on Draft Buzz, they have him at 12 overall, so a little bit higher than where the average ADP puts him. But as we work our way through it, it's funny. One guy that was falling in mock drafts to that 25th pick was a player in Kancey out of Pitt. He looked absolutely phenomenal. Now his average ADP is 48, but I've been through plenty of mock drafts on PFF, over on ESPN, looking at big boards where he's going a bit higher. Now again, you can like that player, but I'm not going to love that player or love players like this until we get a little bit deeper into the draft. Here's what I thought was phenomenal about this, though. As we worked our way through, there's a couple of guys that I was blown away by where they are, and this is going by Draft Buzz, on the overall board versus what I thought was productive. And one of the first guys that I'll mention here is an average, this is 57, so I wouldn't say that it's terrible actually for him, but a second rounder for a player like Mazi Smith, who looks really good in these drills, 6'3", powerful body, 337 pounds. If we're talking about the things that you can see from certain guys that just absolutely shock you, I want to make sure if I have his numbers right here. He ended up being, for me, in the four bag, in the rush, in the running club. But, the way that I ended up doing this, just to give you a sense of it, is I looked at all of these drills and I graded them on 3 scales. And again, I'm trying to take into account the size of the player. So a guy like Mazi Smith, who shows a level of athleticism, a level of lightness on his 337-pound body, he's going to end up getting a lot more positive grades around some of these. But in every drill that they were available for, they either get the arrow up, a plus grade, a neutral grade, or a minus grade. And essentially, it doesn't now, the difference being, and we'll see this more in the edge group number 2, when you look at guys that get progressively better as you work through the drills, like into the zone coverage drills, the drop back drills, well, some natural athleticism takes over. But unlike when you see it maybe in the linebacker room where you want to have coverage linebackers, you maybe want to be able to use these guys in zones, picking up running backs out of the backfield with more consistency, that's where it actually matters more. In these drills, it's some of the times I look at them and go, maybe this guy would be better transitioning into an inside linebacker, into a weak side linebacker, and not being someone that you're going to want to drop in and be a consistent pass rushing threat, even though maybe he has these other abilities that you like more. So Mazi Smith was just the guy I want to mention because he looked absolutely phenomenal. Again, not a guy that's going to necessarily be on the Giants board. As we move our way through, Ika out of BU, I liked, didn't love him. Again, he's playing at 335. So if you compare him directly with Mazi Smith, I thought that Smith just looked so good in these drills at the combine. Really liked his game. Van Ness is another guy that I started to look at. Again, he's going still high in these rounds. He looks pretty good. I hate to say it. A lot of times, some of the white guys end up being a little bit stiff in the hips, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. They struggle in certain areas. But again, when it comes to him, a guy that's playing at 272 pounds, D-line edge rusher, getting him back into some of these other coverage drills is not nearly as important. But I want to focus on a handful of names, and I'll pull up their draft profiles on Draft Buzz because, again, I'm blown away by the relative ranking of where they stand coming in to where they could go. One of the first guys, and we'll get into page 2 here, was Dexter Sr., who comes out of, I'm gonna misplace him here for a second, but I will find him because he ended up being 73rd on the overall board. Average ADP across all draft boards, a 76. Out of Florida, Gator, 310. Now, it's a little bit interesting because at 310 pounds, 6'6", I thought that his overall game, when we run through, ran a sub 540, gave you positive on the bags. I had him neutral going in the pass rush, going in the running club. I had him actually positive on the bag, neutral in running club, neutral in rush, positive though when we talk about the hoops. And this is a nice one. When we think about big bodies and guys playing around the line of scrimmage, I love to see the hoop drill, which seems so silly when you're watching it, but guys that can get down low, that can pick up that towel and also place it back down, not drop it, not scoop it up, snatch it. That's that quick reaction that's showing that ability to get around the edge, work in space. Now, Again, Dexter Sr. is a guy you're going to play across this line. You can use him on the inside, depending if it's 3-4, 4-3. But I really was impressed by what I saw from him. And relative to some of these other guys going up the board, like a Benton, like a Smith was really impressive, but even like a Breesy, these are guys that I really thought looked okay. Ika is another one. I thought that here's a player that's averaging 42nd overall on the draft board, a handful of players higher than a player like Dexter Sr. And I think Dexter Sr. just did a great job for himself. Talked about on NFL Network. They said all those guys were there praising him. I think they had Dwight Freeney was on hand with a couple other players as well. Those are guys that I really liked. Another player that I had looked at who had a 130 average ADP and is 130 on the board when it comes to Draft Buzz. And that was going to be, and then I'm going to double back on, there's 3 youngs being mentioned here between these first 2 groups. But the other guy that I want to make sure that I touch on here is going to be, before I lose it, Ajumo, out of Texas. I was looking at Overshown for Texas at the linebacker spot, but right around that 89 to 100 kind of range is where Ajumo showed up. Now, I was reading it. I started to watch. I didn't get to watch a lot of tape on him. I was okay. I was lukewarm on him and the way that a lot of people are scouting him. To watch him at the combine, I ended up grading him out on the handful of drills that he ran. Positive on the bag, neutral on pass rush. I loved him in the running club. I loved him in the hoops. 130 again overall. And the way that I also, for whatever it's worth, when I doubled down on this and started thinking about, well, what are the ways in which I can then try to compartmentalize what I'm seeing at the end of this? So I ended up saying, how many drills did they actually run? How many drills did I get to see? Because quite frankly, the start of this NFL Combine on NFL Plus in particular, we're not giving you the graphics telling you which player it was, not verbally telling you which player it was. They eventually cleaned it up, and it got really good from there. But I was looking at it as, how many do they play in? If it's a plus grade, that's 2 points. If it's a neutral grade, that's going to be 1 point. And if it's a minus, it's going to be 0 points. So I'm not going to drag them down over it. But when you go through, on my scale at least, talking about Ajumo, you're talking about 4 drills and 7 points, because he comes out there with 3 pluses, 1 neutral, and for a guy that's being regarded as someone that, I think could go in the 100 range, if, that'd be fine. Back end, compensatory 3, and then into the 4th. I actually thought that he did himself a world of good. And as I started to build out where these particular players in this first position group stood, I had guys that I thought moved themselves up the board here somewhat significantly. Like Dexter Sr. is going to move up the board. He's going to go and be inside of that first, that middle second round kind of territory, which would be a pretty big jump up for him. I think like 15 to 20 positions, he can move the needle for himself. Another guy that I thought did well for himself, which I think I had mentioned previously, maybe not though. Let me just pull him up real quick here. Keanu Benton, I also thought looks great. 309, 6'4". He's a guy going somewhere in the 70s right now on most mock drafts and most boards. Now, Benton, though, is listed, and this is why it's tricky, because Draft Buzz has him at 120. Just like with when we talk about Ajumo, I'm going to get his name wrong 1,000 times, 130, but then you look at his average draft grade, it's significantly higher. So Draft Buzz may be a little bit lower on some of these guys than they should. I would expect them to significantly move up the board in a lot of these instances. But I thought Benton did a great job for himself as well. Neutral on the wave, loved the 4-bag, loved the pass rush, solid on the running club. And in these 2, by the way, in group number 1, and they talk about this on the broadcast, I'm looking for the physicality in those instances, because these bigger boys are the ones that you expect to be able to be physical, to really dominate on the interior, even if it is off the edge. And we're going to get into those guys more. But if you're playing, that'd be more 4-3 for the Giants, which were in the 3-4. But some of these players, maybe all of a sudden you offer the flexibility of being able to run a couple of 4-3 looks. Let Kayvon Thibodeaux, I think, can work easily off the edge in a 4-3 scheme, play a little bit more aggressive on the outside there, and put another big body alongside Dexter Lawrence. This is the way in which, when we think about the Giants and what they're going to accomplish here, there's different ways to manufacture the success. We want nose tackle depth, interior defensive depth. We want linebacker support when it comes to run defense. But the Giants can make themselves stout by giving themselves opportunities to have different players in different positions. So at times, you're going to stand up and put a player like Kayvon Thibodeau out in space. We saw that asked of him. I think that the fluidity was interesting there in his rookie season. But then you can also go ahead and spread that thing out. Have a Leonard Williams with a Dexter Lawrence with an incoming rookie that you like and think has, one or two down value early in the course of the season, and then be productive in that way as well, depending on what they do with the linebacker spot. Then you want to have that pure signal caller back there, a guy that can drop into coverage and be that safety valve for you in behind. Shout out to everybody who came in here, including JC Warbound 7. That's a nice little handle for you. I have faith in our GM and staff. They will draft best players available and then need. Well, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that I will just note here is I agree. First of all, I have all the faith in Joe Schoen and in the scouting staff and getting the players that are going to fit for what we need. But Anthony and I talked about this morning about that idea of like best player available and then need. Well, there's a middle ground to all of that. And we use the tight end as the example. There's going to be Myers is going to be there potentially. And that could be best player available on every single board. But if you're going to tell me that the Giants are going to draft the tight end at 25, boy, it'd be a hard pill to swallow. Now, you can tell me that tight end is going to be a real offensive weapon, and you can, count him, check as a viable receiver, and it's going to open things up for Daniel Bellinger and everybody else. That's fine. But when we think about the needs hierarchy, and we'll find out through free agency and as we get to this franchise tag March 7th date, like there's going to be a lot of things that'll inform how the Giants approach this, but I think it has to be the blend. I think you put your needs group together and then you say, out of that group, my best player available mantra can work as long as it's one of my first, second, or maybe third biggest needs that I have on this roster. I can't take best player available because he fills my fifth most important need on my roster in the first round. That being said, though, it's going to come down to how the board breaks. Other guys that I just want to highlight here, because I thought they did a great job for themselves at this combine. I want to get up the breakdown here. First, let me see if I have. Let's just hit Benton here real quick. He came in, and I don't know if he gave, not everyone's 40 times ended up being available in this one. But again, 120 on Draft Buzz. I think we're looking third round here, maybe the back end, depending on how the board falls. And now he is only a 3-star prospect on ESPN, on 24/7 Sports, on Rivals.com. So there is something to be desired there. But just to highlight the things that are liked about him: plays with leverage at the point of attack, whether inside or outside, keeps eyes in the backfield when inside, moves the lineman to either side with strong hands. He has pure power, which is emphasized by good pad level. He can stand up at the point of attack and handle double teams as well. So these are the things. His physicality is what you like about it. And when you talk about hands, point of attack, one of the drills when they're inside of this, which is the 4-bag, what you're looking for is those eyes up. It means that this is a guy that's capable of executing clean footwork, getting himself onto the right blocks, shifting those blocks around while still staying engaged on where the quarterback is, where the ball is. Is it getting, is there a handoff happening here? Is it play action? Do I need to start to move this down the line so my linebackers can sweep in and clean up? A lot of those things, I thought he did a really nice job in the combine, just showing off these examples. The phase 2 of this is, after I like the way some of these guys look, then I double down and I come back around on some of their tape and see where we stand there. The other guy that came through here, then, I want to make sure that I had him right, because we have a lean young, and then we have 2 other youngs that are a little bit thicker. Out of Bama is going to be Byron Young. So he came out projected for 103 average ADP. I thought that he did a great job. Excuse me. This was interesting. I thought he was fine. Byron Young. But then secondarily, as we'll move well down the list, I'll talk about the other young here that, at least by Draft Buzz, they have him in the 200s. And I think that you'll see him move himself very comfortably up into the 160 to 180 kind of range if he can continue to build off of what we saw here. Another guy that I thought was all right, but flashed well in pass rush and in the running club, that was Coburn out of Texas as well, 6'2". He ran 5.28 projected 40 time at least, But I want to get to these last couple of guys here. Clark struggled in this one. And this is what's interesting to me. Now, he's a 180 kind of player, but Coburn is a 138. Based on what I saw there, I would say that you can feel pretty comfortable about him at 128. You get him at 162. You really like it, and maybe the skill set that you can develop with 332 pounds. A guy like Clark, though, 334, 6'4". He's in the 180s. But if I have it correct here, based on what I watched, anywhere in like the 150 to 180 range, I think he's probably dropping. I think he's closer to 200 coming out of what we're seeing at this combine. Redmond was another guy. He came into this one. Well, you know what? I have my better board organized here. This is the one that we want to be looking at here because it gives me a nice clean layout. Excuse me. Yeah, Redmond did not do himself any favors. He was already low-hanging fruit. I think he's a lot lower now. Here's a guy that I thought had a really nice one for himself, although he's actually going to fall into more of that edge category. So Redmond was put into the D line, the first group category. And then we'll talk about, if not on this little brief episode, we'll see how far we get. We'll talk about Baldonado. Whew, we got there, friends. We did it together. Out of Pitt. Baldonado, who I thought did really well for himself. He's average ADP in the 170s, but he played in the edge group. And I think that his athleticism came through a lot better for him. These are two guys listed the same going into the draft, but one player at 291, significantly heavier in Redmond. I think that he's just maybe going to get caught in between. 6'2", 291. Didn't love the way his athleticism looked. Don't know if he'll be able to get around that edge successfully. Whereas Baldonado, we did it. I love him at 251, 6'4". Remember, I talked about Overshone, who was playing at 220. Now, that's a pure linebacker. This is edge rusher, but he showed a lot. I thought Baldonado really showed a lot. We talk about his measurables in terms of what he was able to do. We're doing a little peek here going forward into the next round. So this is why I liked him a lot. There's a little preview here, but it's really worth noting because I think he's going to move up the boards in a big way. In the wave, the four bag, and the pass rush, I had them all neutrally graded. It was okay. 251, I thought maybe not showing enough burst, not showing enough muscle mass, not showing enough strength potentially to be able to contribute there. But you know where he was really positive? In the running club drill, which is just on the move. That showed physicality in that drill. Also in the hoop, great flexibility, getting down, the leaning into that edge, not running it upright. Really good for him there. Loved it in the body control, which is just showing range of motion, back, forward, away from the line of scrimmage. Also loved him in, because I messed up one of my things and had to correct it here. Oh, and this is where I really liked him out into the hybrid. Now, he didn't do the second hybrid drill, but even into the third one, which is the 15, 20 yards away from line of scrimmage, he was excellent. So go ahead and put him on your list. That was a little bit of a sneak peek going way into our second conversation. But it comes up on the board here. I just have to bring him up because I really liked him. Frankly, I liked a lot of what I saw out of group number 2 and what that can mean for the Giants, anywhere from 89 to 162. I think that they're going to have a lot of players that Wink Martindale, that Joe Schoen, that this Giants team can look at and say, edge, little bit of, that little more athleticism, little bit of hybrid, can maybe get moved around in the 3-4 scheme. Kicking him inside? No. But if you think about down and distance, remember, Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeaux, neither one of them am I going to say is like ultra confident in dropping back in coverage. Now, I think they both can do it, and I think Thibodeaux is only going to get better at it because you've seen him play in space. Some of it's about the hip tightness with him. I mean, he's a big boy, and he really, you want that muscle, that strength, that energy going downhill and getting after the quarterback. Some of these guys, I think, will be really nice supplemental players to put into the depth group and say, work out there in space. So just a really, really nice group of players there. But if we want to get into the handful of guys that I think are important, if you want to add depth on the defensive line and you want to also find value. So Pickens was the other guy that I wanted to make sure that we get to here. And I'll work up to him just because I came to Silvera, defensive line, 304, 6'2". This guy looked like a little miniature bull in a very violent china shop, or a very violent bull in a little tiny shop, whatever it is. It was absolutely impressive what he did. Looking at his marks across the board, in the wave, in the four bag, in the pass rush, in the running club. The hoops, I had him down as neutral, but again, this guy is 304 pounds and 6'2". He's like a little, what was the Maurice Jones-Drew bowling ball of daggers? I loved the way this guy looked in terms of his build and then his athleticism that he was able to show. Again, now Silvera is getting listed right now. When we talk about draft stock, he's being put at 254 on Draft Buzz. And if you go by average ADP, 245. Those sixth and seventh round picks, I would love to earmark one of them to get a player like this because I think he has all of the athleticism and power to be a nice little supplemental piece, someone that can come in, wreak a bit of havoc for you, and enough of that mass to help playing off of Dexter Lawrence to kind of shift around those offensive linemen a little bit. Just something that, frankly, those double teams were absolutely brutal, and no support from the linebacking core matters there. But I really, really liked what I saw from him. And then let's try to work our way up here. I was also pretty high on Stills, and he came out. I couldn't track down where he was. He was in the 250s as well. I liked what I saw from him. We'll probably circle back to him at some point. Pickens is the last guy that I want to get to here for right now, just because I really thought that he showed being a 130 prospect. So I got to just see where his overall, they'll put him. I got to work back up the board here a touch. This is, again, from a value standpoint, I think somewhere between 128 and 162 is going to be an opportunity. I think there's going to be an opportunity to get a real value depth player that can be a contributor. There he is. Okay. So this is why it's interesting. And he probably shows off to me. Draft Buzz, again, a little bit low on some of these guys. 105 average draft position. That feels right. It also feels like he's going to be a guy at 291, 6'4", that ends up going top 100 when it's all said and done. He looked really good in all of these drills across the board. I had him marked down positive on... It ran a 4.78, by the way, sub 540 as well. Positive in every single drill that he went through. 3 drills accounted for, 6 plus in the point margin. And just to give you a couple of hits here. This says, okay, decent mover to show surprising quickness for a 300-pounder, and he's probably going to put on a little bit of mass at the next level. Looks the part with natural size and filled out frame with good body thickness. Pickens has the lateral agility and balance to cover 2 gaps, and Pickens shows some good closing burst when moving down the line in pursuit. Stays coordinated through contact and can anchor well in the run game, generating power from his lower half. I won't belabor it, but I just really thought that he had a great showing here at the combine. When we're talking about these middle kind of the pack guys, I don't see the Giants taking a defensive lineman at 25, at 57, maybe even at 89. Depends on what happens in those first 2 picks. But at 100, depending on what you've accomplished, again, best player available to what's being mentioned in the chat. Of course, if one of these guys is there when you get to 100, I could have the discussion, but especially at 128, like if you tell me that Pickens is going to be there, if you tell me that Ajumo is going to be there at 128. If you tell me maybe that Benton, for whatever reason, ends up back there. Now, again, all of these guys are about 15 to 20 positions higher in their overall average ADP. So you're talking about just other value needs coming up the board for other teams. And maybe that's one of those things. It doesn't have to be defensive line, but where the Giants make the marginal move up the board just to kind of get a target that they really like. You have 5th, 6th, multiple 6th, multiple 7th round picks. You have some ammo to say, hey, 3-4 spots up the board here could actually really impress. So those are the guys that I liked out of that group. And I'll talk about Stills down the road here as we work our way through. The Substack will be where I'll create this hierarchy board now. I'm taking a look as well. Oh, Young was the one other player that I wanted to make sure that I just brought up where he sits. Again, Draft Buzz overall, and then ultimately the couple of things that I liked about him. And some of what it is too, man, for a lot of these things, like there's a reason why Breesy looked every bit of the part. Breesy looked like a guy that's going to go top 15, right? Dexter Jr., I thought right in the part where you want him, right? A player moving up into up around 70, 73 or higher potentially with performances like this. Won't be shocked if he's in the back end of the second round when it's all said and done. Can't see another player that did that, right? Looking to go somewhere in the first round. All these guys look good. But the difference between like watching a player like Roy out of LSU, who had some positive marks on, some neutral, but like I don't know if the eye test fully got me excited about him. When you see it around 78, and then you realize you can go all the way back into the 130s and maybe even beyond. And again, no, it's not going to be like for like, but the difference between mid to late third and fifth round in terms of getting value, I think that there's some of these guys that are closing the gap there, especially in this group number one. Let's go ahead and I want to make sure that I track down my friend here before we get out the door. He's been a hard one to get to, though. Oh, because he's way down the list. That's why. Have him at 227 on their board. So let's see if we can just get him here before we get out the door. I'll take a break. I may come back in tonight. I may come back in tomorrow just because the linebacker group is going to be absolutely exciting for me. And frankly, like I'm highlighting 5, 6 guys here, and I thought they all played well. I think that some of them did a real service for themselves in their draft stock. But if we're just talking about what really out of these first 2 groups got me excited, it's that, man, I cannot believe how good this edge rush group looked. A ton of these guys, and I have Young up here in front of me. A ton of these guys. Beal Jr., Baldonado, as I mentioned before. I thought Anderson played well for himself. I thought Foskey played really well. Going down the list, Horton, he's neutral there. I'm trying to pick out some of my other big names here. McGuire, pretty solid for himself. McDonald did a great job for himself here at the Combine. Ramirez, that's a name that I have to track down where he is on the draft boards right now because I thought he played incredibly well in these drills. Played is the wrong term. I thought he showcased very well in these drills. So phase 2 will obviously be getting into their tape. And then Tuipulotu, I thought did an absolutely excellent job, including in the range drills, the short, mid-range, zone, and break drills. I thought that for a guy of his size, he looked absolutely phenomenal as well. So some really good stuff in that group, and I'm going to end up being 10 players deep on that with relative ease. Just to round out, though, as we have all of the Youngs up on the board here. There's my guy. I kept forgetting which it was, right? So now you have Bryce Young, quarterback, no big deal. But you also have Byron Young, also out of Bama, D lineman 294.63, looked okay to me. You have Byron Young, defensive lineman 256.2. He went in the second group. And then you have Cameron Young out of Mississippi State, who is coming in at 304 pounds. This guy is an absolute beast, in my personal opinion. I loved everything that he showed here in these drills. I think if we look at draft projection, Draft Buzz has him as a 7th. This guy is more than worth spending draft capital on. Again, think about the scouting report on him. Here's what he doesn't do well by the scouting report. Lacks closing speed and inconsistent quickness off the snap prevents him from being an elite pass rusher. His spin move is a bit slow and mechanical. He's susceptible to cut blocks, a tactic that will be used on him often. While he's a decent lateral mover, Young doesn't show great closing speed in the chase and pursuit. But again, I'm talking about putting this guy on the line in Wink Martindale's scheme when I want to bulk up, when I want someone that can shut down those lanes on the interior of the offensive line and allow, hopefully, my crop of young linebackers to come in and clean it up and allow Kayvon Thibodeaux and allow Azeez Ojulari to come clean it up. Provided some secondary interior pass rush. That's what I liked about it. And I think some of the attributes he showcased today lean in that direction. Getting penetration when playing 3 technique. Pops off the tape due to his explosive first step. And this is where, when I go back to watching him, the wave, yes, but the pass rush also very good. Now, the running club, I didn't think he looked as explosive as I would have liked, but at an average, again, 227, we're talking about 6th, 7th round pick here. With all the picks, if the Giants don't move off of them, I wouldn't even hesitate to take a player that has an excellent motor, quick to locate the ball and make plays against the run, good weight room strength, which translates onto the field in terms of his anchor, strong tackler, has good power in his hands, anchor, shed, and chase. Young is strong enough in the lower body to hold up at the point of attack, and he also displays good feel as a grappler in a phone booth, consistently getting blockers off balance before sending them to the ground. So all I want here from this position is a depth player that I think can come in and be disruptive for however many reps he's going to get. So I really liked what I saw from him. So across this handful, I have, when we talk about the range here, right? Silvera all the way back in the back end of the 250s, 220s, 220s for Young out of Mississippi State. We work up the board to a player like Pickens in the 120s, 130s, Ojumo in the 100s to 130s potentially there. And Dexter Jr. as well, who could be as high as in the 70s there and might not be something the Giants would even think about targeting until you get to 89 or 100. I got 4 or 5 guys, though, that I can really get excited about as being potential targets for the Giants after they've addressed some of their more pressing issues. And if you think about even getting past 128 and 162, still going to be some really good names there. We'll go ahead and wrap it up there for now. When we come back in, because I'm winded and out of breath here, we'll break these down a little bit more in a little more concise nature. Again, the Substack is a great spot to go because I'll highlight the things that I think these players do well. I'll highlight what I saw at the combine combined with what I watch on tape, because the difference between watching the non-pad movements, again, it's not going to tell you everything. But as we said in this morning's episode, and I think I said even going back the last couple of years, what I love about the combine is when the pads are all off, you start to close the gap between 180 and 100, between 75 and 125. And as those guys start to come to the middle, two things happen that can be positive for the Giants. One, you start to say, well, we can find a lot of value throughout this draft. And two, if you can congest some of these positions and some of these players around one another in the draft, when those runs start in April, all of a sudden someone else at another position can fall out of it. So I think all of this is always positive, especially if we think about where the Giants are currently in the draft board and how wide receiver, for example, a guy like Rashee Rice, who I really like. Well, if I start to look over this and say, if I'm looking through my board and I think that there's a chance that guys that were in the 70s, like Dexter, guys that were in the, let's see, and maybe someone who's in like the 30s or the 40s takes a little bit of a step back. Because a lot of these guys, for the most part, 78, that was the other one, Roy. Well, if they can live around that area and you can get a couple of runs on a position like that, then maybe a wide receiver, not necessarily Rice, but maybe a receiver falls a little bit and the Giants get to benefit from that. Maybe a linebacker can fall in what looks like could be a very deep class combined with what we're seeing out of the edge room. So that's my 2 cents. Got very excited watching this. Really loving seeing these drills go down. I will continue to just build off of this. But on a Thursday night, man, I wanted to dive in, have some fun, let you know some of the things that I'm excited about, and stay tuned for that edge rushing group number 2, who I thought really showed a lot of athleticism. If some of the players that are being put into the edge group are being put there because of what the linebacking group is going to look like, could be in for a real treat here. So tomorrow we'll talk about the other 2 groups. The combine will continue to roll on. And if some things fall through the cracks as this combine weekend unfolds, going forward, week over week, we'll continue to flesh this out. And we'll also monitor how much of the draft board has changed after a weekend like this. We know this is the weekend where guys can really cement themselves or potentially drop out of it. I'm looking at my other page and wanting to rip off some of the information for you. We leave it there. Thanks for checking in with me. This will be up. You can check it out. Get us on the podcast. You get the Substack, obviously, as well. Doing the thing, man. Moving along. And as shameless as it may be, don't forget, if you happen to be a hockey fan, check out the Devil's Puck Luck podcast. That trade deadline is coming up tomorrow afternoon, and we're going to be doing a lot of great coverage, myself and Danny McDonough, around that. So if you're not, spread the word. Tell your friends, hey, someone's doing some Devils coverage, and you may be interested. Thanks again for being with us here on OGP. We'll be back again soon, talking all things New York Football Giants.